in Xamarin.Forms over the past 2 years. So one thing to note is Xamarin.Forms is not Xamarin. Xamarin, the platform, has been around for over 5 years, 6 or 7 years. Xamarin, the platform, which is Xamarin Traditional as we call it, that's basically a very thin wrapper over the native APIs for Xamarin, whereas Xamarin.Forms is an abstraction on top of Xamarin, which is a UI toolkit abstraction. And that was released about 2 years ago. So a little bit about me. I'm a Xamarin MVP, community blogger. Been blogging for about 2, maybe 3 years. You're just talking about Xamarin and doing different presentations and open source stuff. So I have a team where we do Xamarin all day and night, late into the night for some client projects, but that's just the way it is sometimes. So we also, because we do so much Xamarin work all day and night, we have some sort of byproducts that we try to open source and give back to the community as much as possible. So the first one is Fresh MVVM. So it's like an MVVM framework for Xamarin.Forms. So this framework had its origins when Xamarin.Forms was first released. And I started working on that for every project that we were doing in Xamarin.Forms. So it's all open source, you can go and have a look at it. And Slider Kit was a component that we tried to develop as like a commercial component. It didn't really work out that well because we put so much effort into it and not enough people were using it, so we decided it would be better open source where more people would use it. So that's open source as well. Fresh Essentials for Xamarin.Forms. So you can see we primarily do Xamarin.Forms, that's all we do. And that's why all our components are Xamarin.Forms. Fresh Essentials is the essential stuff that we use in every project. So what's new in Xamarin.Forms? It works, which is like a funny thing to say because debatably 2 years ago it didn't actually work. I mean, it did work if you knew how to actually make it work, but if you just took it out of the box and started using it, the Android would have lots of performance issues, and they didn't predict the type of apps that people were trying to build with Xamarin.Forms. They really thought people were just going to do like proof of concept applications. But people saw it and they loved it and they wanted to use it for their commercial applications and consumer applications. So they really didn't predict any of that. So people started using Xamarin.Forms, thought it was Xamarin, thought this is the way to do things because it was so easy to get started. And then this sort of stuff started going up around the web. So you'll see some Reddits and stuff like that. But it's good news that it actually works now, so we can get rid of all of them, which is good. Actually, I was going through some old slide decks that I used to use a couple of years ago, and I'm so glad that I'm actually able to get rid of these now. It's really good. So Xamarin.Forms, the apps that we build now, there's no way we could have built them 2 years ago in Xamarin.Forms. It's less buggy, much less buggy. So I did a calculation. There's 1,500 bugs resolved. You can look it up on Bugzilla, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's debatable whether those bugs should have been in there in the first place, but at least they're fixed now, which is good. It's more performant. So we tend to find that it's 5 to 10 times more performant than when it first came out, which I can give you a demo of. So let's jump into a demo here. So what I've actually done, how many people have used Xamarin or Xamarin.Forms before? Just a couple of people. Okay, so if you can see over here, over to the left, I've got my Xamarin.Forms solution. Oh, you can't actually see it. Let's just change this. Okay, so you can see over to the left here, I've got a Xamarin.Forms solution here. So you can see here I've got an iOS project, I've got an Android project, and I've got a portable class library. So the portable class library is shared between my iOS and my Android project. So this is primarily where you want to keep most of your code with a Xamarin application. So what you can actually see here is if I go into my packages, what I've done is I've gone back to Xamarin.Forms version 1.0 just to sort of see if I try to build an app in 1.0, how's it actually going to look. So if I run this application now, simulator's running. So you can see as I'm scrolling there, you can't even actually see the images. Just dropping frames. So that's Xamarin.Forms 1.0. I did the same application with the latest version of Xamarin.Forms. So you can see if I jump into my packages, version 2.3, which is the latest stable version of Xamarin. So you can see it's a lot smoother. One thing is this can get even smoother if there's a third-party library that you can use called FF Image Loader, which I'll bring up in another slide. If you're going to be using Xamarin.Forms on Android, then you want to use FF Image Loader, but I'll talk about that down the track. So one of the things that makes it a lot faster is the list view cell recycling. So what that actually does is it, when you have a bunch of cells in a long list in Xamarin, it'll actually cache the cells that you've used previously, and it'll just update the binding context. So it doesn't have to recreate the whole view. It just relays out the view where it actually needs to relay out the view. So where you change the binding context, if you have any bindings, it'll just update the label. It won't have to worry about creating a whole new view. So you get huge performance increases with that. So you can see the list view creation strategy. Retain element is the traditional way, and the new way is using the recycle element. By default, it's the traditional way, which is the retain element. So you need to make sure you actually update that in your list. So the data template selector, it enables you to have different types of cells in your list views. So generally, if any application, you're probably going to have a list somewhere, and it's probably going to have multiple types of views in that list. So this actually allows you to use the cell recycling, but with different types of views. So you can see here. So just say you imagine your chat window or your messages window in iOS. You've got like an incoming message view and you've got an outgoing message view. So here, when it's coming in, I've got the incoming data template. And then when it's outgoing, I've got the outgoing data template. XAML, compile XAML. This is a big one. So Xamarin.Forms 1.0, it actually took your XAML and put it into the project. And then at runtime, it was like parsing it and inflating it. Now with XAML-C, you can actually have it turned into ILL at compile time. So it's faster, smaller app size because you're not embedding all the XAML. And you can see the XAML errors at build time. So at the global level, you've got, you can turn on the XAML compilation options compile. So that'll happen for that whole assembly. And then if you're having any issues, you can turn it off at the class level. So in general, we've found it about 5 times faster. It really depends because it's all device specific, so you get different results on all different devices and different numbers that you put in, but just on average, it's about 5 times faster. It does increase your build times, but it's not very big. It's 15 seconds for your average app. So this data is thanks to Matthew, who works on a toolkit called mFractor. It's kind of like your ReSharper, but for Xamarin Studio on the Mac. Very early days, but it looks like it's going to have lots of potential. So if you're using Xamarin Studio on a Mac, I recommend checking it out. So let's actually have a look at what we've done in our code to improve the performance. So this is the fast application that I demoed before. You can see here I've got a list view. And then I'm actually changing the list view caching strategy to recycle element. So previously this was the only way that you could do it, put it into the constructor, but now you can actually also do it via a property on the list view, and it'll work. One other thing that I've enabled to get that performance increase is the compilation. And you can also see that I'm using the data template selector. So that's, these things here are like the biggest things that I personally like in Xamarin.Forms. What's changed, because it enables me to develop apps that I can use as consumer-facing applications. There's other things that I'll go over, but these are definitely my favorite things because performance is important. So I'll just give a demo of some of the things that you can actually build with Xamarin.Forms. So this app is pretty much a consumer-facing application that's fully built in Xamarin.Forms. You'll notice here, actually, this is a list view. Remember I was talking about the data template selector? So this is using the XAML compilation, the data template selector, and the cell recycling. I mean, it's actually a little bit laggy because of, on my phone it's really fast, but because it's going up to that big screen, it's a little bit laggy. But this is probably about as far as we've pushed Xamarin.Forms. I mean, anything more than this with lots and lots of animations, you'd probably want to go the traditional route. But if you want something that's sort of your standard consumer application, then Xamarin.Forms is probably a good choice. One thing that you can do as well is if I take it offline, it should still work. So that's more of a consumer-facing one. We do lots of business applications. This is an app that allows people to learn how to sell better, so they record themselves. So this whole view here, this is all Xamarin.Forms. Down here, that tab bar, even though it is native components and it looks and feels native, it is actually cross-platform between iOS and Android. Primarily, most of it's in Xamarin.Forms. Well, the whole thing's in Xamarin.Forms, but there's areas where you can actually include native parts. Like, I don't know if you can see down the bottom there, that's actually the camera view. So you're actually seeing what's coming out of the camera. And that's all, the whole view is Xamarin.Forms, but that's just using like a custom renderer. So if I delete this old video, so you can see here, this is actually going to start recording me. So if I was a sales guy trying to do my pitch, then this is recording me, and then I can stop that. It's actually recording me. So this is still Xamarin.Forms. That's a native view within Xamarin.Forms, and it's done through a custom renderer. So I can keep that and submit that to my boss and see if I've done a good sales job. So this is, both those apps you couldn't build with earlier versions of Xamarin.Forms. So sometimes, if you go back and have a look at some of the old Reddit posts, what Xamarin.Forms was back then and what it is now isn't the same. So let's talk about what else is new. So it's open source. And this is a big thing for a lot of people because people want to learn how the platform works and they want to like dive into the code. Lots of people said that we're going to fix lots of bugs, but a lot of people haven't done that. but at least it sort of reduces your risk of having closed source software that you sort of have no idea of what's going on, and you don't know if what happens to Xamarin, what am I going to do? At least if it's open source, at least you've actually got the code to be able to use it and compile it, and it does reduce the risk a lot. And if there's any features you want to build, Xamarin are open to people doing pull requests. So this is a pull request that happened just the other day. It actually allows you to, so a UI label here, that is a native UI label, whereas on the Android, it's a text view. So you're actually able to do native embedding of native controls directly into your XAML in the cross-platform way, which is really cool. So hopefully they'll approve that pull request. So there's a new application class. So these methods here on this application, these are portable. So they actually work across iOS, Android, and Windows. So when the application starts, no matter what platform it is, you'll get that event. When it sleeps, no matter what platform it is, you'll get that event. So one other thing is you can actually change the main page. So here where I've got this main page, just say I've got like an area which is like a login area, and then I've got my main part of the application. I can swap that around by setting the main page, and it'll reset that. So if we actually have a look at this application here, so you can see where I've opened this application over to the left here, this is the portable class library. Works for iOS and Android, and this is my application here. So you can see I've got my on start, on sleep, on resume methods. So there's new gesture recognizers. Gesture recognizers are a big thing when you're building native apps, because you want to be able to have that interaction with a user without having them to always tap. You want them to be able to use the whole screen to interact with your apps. So we've always had the tap. Now there's a long tap, a pan. So pan, if you don't know what it is, it's actually when you put your finger down and you move it around the device, and then pinch. As you can see here, it's when you're doing the pinching and zooming. So I've actually got a demo of that. So I'm not actually doing it with my finger here, I'm just doing it with my mouse, but you can see if I had my finger and I was able to move things around, I'm actually getting all those events. And that's actually still a Xamarin.Forms view and a Xamarin.Forms image. And I think this, if you look at it, there's actually no code in the native area. That's all cross-platform code. So it should still work on Android. Haven't tested this on Android, so fingers crossed. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. I guess if you've done XAML before, you have your favorites, like your behaviors and triggers. So when Xamarin.Forms was first released, those features weren't implemented, but they are now. Let's just go. So you can hear I've got my numeric validation behavior. So I've got a behavior on an entry element. When it's attached, I have an event that I attach to when the text is changed. And then when the text is changed, I actually check if it actually parses as a double and then changes the color. Then on my content page here, I've got my label and my entry, and on my entry.behaviors, I've added my the numeric validation behavior. So So we should be able to test that. One thing you'll notice is I'm on iOS. So the reason that we primarily use iOS for a lot of our development is just the whole build time and debug time is a lot quicker than using Android. So yeah, so if I put in numbers there, it's all good. Then when I put in letters, it's going to break it. So control templates is something that they introduced, it was about 12 months ago. So it's a reusable container template. So basically, it's kind of like a master page. So you can see here you've got like your header area and your footer area, and then you just change the content inside. So that will always stay, and that will always stay, and then the content on the different pages will change. So a bit like your master page concept. So you can see in my application class here, which is like my main part of my application, I've got a control template, which is the teal template. Inside that template, I've got a grid that's all set up. And what you notice is there's a thing called a content presenter. So what actually happens is when you apply that control template to a control, it'll put the contents of the control on the inside, and then it'll always wrap that same control with what you put around the content presenter. So this is kind of like the master part of it, and then the content is the inner content. So you can actually swap that around. So this is the teal template. Down here we've got the aqua template, which basically just changes the color, but it's still the same sort of setup with the content presenter. And then once we go to the home page, you can see on this content view here, we're using a control template, which is the teal template. And then what we're also doing on the fly, when the button's clicked, we're actually changing the control template between the aqua and the teal template. So let's just run that. So you can see up the top there, so that grid is the whole control, what's actually been produced in the end. What was in the template is this header part and the footer part, and then the content on the inside's been changed. And then when I hit the change theme, it's just changing the content on the top and the bottom. So effects. So Xamarin.Forms has always had this concept of custom renderers. So you could have your own PCL label or whatever control you wanted that you would have in your common library, and then you'd have a custom renderer. Effects are like a light version of that, which you can attach to it. So you can take any control and you can create an effect that you attach to it, and you can have multiple effects on a single control. So, and then you can modify the native part of the whole the whole control. So it's optional per platform. So it's not done via inheritance. So when you have a custom renderer, normally you're inheriting from one of the built-in custom renderers that Xamarin.Forms provides. So this allows you to basically attach behavior to a control, but on the native side. So it's not doing it on the PCL side, it's actually doing it on the native side. So you can see here, this is an entry element, and then I've got my effects property there, and what I'm actually doing is resolving an effect, which is the Xamarin.border effect. And if we go into it, you can see on iOS, I've inherited from the platform effect, and then when it's attached, I've got access to that control, which is the native control on iOS, and then I'm updating the purple color and the border width. And then when it's on detaching, it's getting rid of that. So you can have multiple to a control, so you can have multiple effects apply to a control, or you can apply one effect to multiple controls. So it's more via composition rather than inheritance. So these nice little improvements, these are probably one of my favorite as well, rather than the big features that Xamarin have put out, because I use these little ones every day. So like scroll to async, just having that is something that you kind of really need, especially in a mobile platform. Being able to get the position of the X and Y on a scroll view, list view, separator enhancements, something that you'll probably have to modify on most projects. Header and footer, use that every day, and port refresh. It's kind of like just really essential things that the platform really needed, which is good that they put them in. So some of the preview features. So some of these have been in preview for a while, so it won't be long before they actually come out. So the carousel view, not the carousel page. So Xamarin.Forms, when it first came out, had this thing called a carousel page. The carousel page didn't work that well, and they said don't use it, use the carousel view. So the carousel page was really slow. It wasn't virtualized, so it didn't have the cell recycling, whereas carousel view does. So it's an embedded carousel. You can have the carousel view anywhere. Because it's a view and not a full page, you can have 5 of them if you want to. And it supports the templating, fully customizable, and it uses the recycling, as I said. So we can have a look at the carousel view. So you can see on this monkeys page, Xamarin had this thing with monkeys. I actually have some monkeys if anybody asks a good question or just comes up to me later and I can give you a monkey. I've got t-shirts, but all the t-shirts that I have are really small for some reason. So yeah, I don't know if we can get any t-shirts. They actually are very small. How small is that? If you can fit into that shirt, you can have it. I don't even know if that would. I think that looks like a kid's shirt. Maybe you can get one for your kid if you have a kid. Yes?
I you're more experienced in this than I'll ever be, but with regards to XAML versus the C#,
Yes.
implementation, there's always I write it in C# because I like C#. I prefer XAML because I'm a WPF developer and all that sort of thing. Are there any distinct disadvantages to doing one or the other, or is it just a preference thing?
It's definitely just a preference thing. I think if you do it in code, you're more likely to do lots of dynamic layout, which is probably not a good thing. You want to kind of keep your design your layout. If you design your layouts in XAML, they're probably going to be a lot more performant than if you're moving controls up and down and doing lots of dynamic stuff. The thing that I like about XAML, and most people you'll find use XAML, because when you come back to it, it's so much easier to read. When you write it in C#, it's all right. When you come back to it and read it, you're just like, what is going on here? Whereas XAML is actually good to read. Actually, we definitely use XAML. I even prefer something even more declarative than XAML, like HAML or something like that in Xamarin. Maybe one day, but definitely there's no real disadvantages or advantages, apart from there was performance issues in the past using XAML. But because they do XAML C, there's no issue there anymore. But yeah, I used to do C# because it was easier because it had all the IntelliSense. But after I started using XAML and coming back to projects, I never went back. So yeah, definitely recommend XAML. So do we? Yes. So we've got this carousel view here. So because it's using the cell recycling. You've got like an item source here. You're using an item template with a data template. So here, got our carousel view. So one of the other things that I'm really looking forward to, but it's in preview at the moment. I was going to give a demo of it, but all my demos were working. So to actually get this working, you need to update Xamarin Studio to the preview release, which I was a bit too scared to do just before this. But if you do upgrade to the newer versions of Xamarin Studio, you can have a XAML previewer. So it actually, behind the scenes, they're actually almost running the application and then just putting the view there for you. So that'll work if you have dynamically injected things and things like that. And it'll work in your application. Well, it'll take things from your application class. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's one thing that we don't have. So it's just a previewer. It's not a designer. I don't know what plans they have for a designer. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Haven't heard a lot about it. So app links. So both iOS, Android, I'm not sure about Windows actually, have their own app links implementation. So if you send a web link, you can actually make it open in a native application. So if, say this is Evolve Xamarin and it's actually a web link, the way they set it up is when it comes in, it actually opens the native application. Actually, while I'm there, this is the Xamarin Evolve conference app. This app is a great example of what you can do in Xamarin.Forms. I actually have the app on my device, so I'll give you a demo of it later. But they set up app links in, so it works, so it comes into your portable class library. So if we have a look at our app here and override the app link. So this is in the portable class library, so it's actually working on iOS and Android, and that app link is coming through, and then once you get the link, you can decide what you actually want to do with it. But we'll have a look at the Xamarin Evolve app. So data pages. So basically you can take an Azure mobile service or an Azure data source or a JSON data source and have like a contacts application or a contacts functionality already sort of set up for you. So the views will be there, the list view will be there, the contact will be there. And the same for events, and there's other things that they'll be adding to it. So this is preview, so I don't have a demo of it, but it should be good for the rapid prototyping. I mean, this is not, we don't actually use this personally a lot for Xamarin.Forms because usually we actually get designs that are done by a designer. That's why we care more about the performance than this. But if you're doing rapid prototyping, then this is probably a good option. Or if you just want to build out something really quickly, then this is a good option. Themes as well. So they've got a light theme and a dark theme. So these themes actually, they're still in preview, but you can download them and you can use them now. So you can have so like I said, a light theme or a dark theme. There's a few different views that come through with the themes. I mean, it's still early days, so I don't even know exactly how many different things they're actually going to bring down with the theme, but it should be good. So this is a good one, native embedding. So sometimes you have a Xamarin.Forms application, and if you have some sort of native component you want to put into your Xamarin.Forms application, previously you had to create a custom control and then a custom control renderer. Now you can actually just take a native component and embed it directly into the control hierarchy of Xamarin.Forms. So here, this is a fab button that you'll see on Android. In this case, it's just been put straight into the Xamarin.Forms control hierarchy, and the same with this selector here. So directly embed native controls. So you can see here on Android, so this is I say native, but it's a Xamarin Android, which we call native because it is very close to the native layer. So this is a fab button. The fab button's down here. You can see it's been added to the Xamarin.Forms control hierarchy, even though that fab button is a native view. There's not anything to do with Xamarin.Forms at all. See this, so you notice when I double click on this, it's not a portable class library. What this is, it's a shared project. So shared projects are a little bit different to portable class libraries in that portable class libraries are their own assembly and they get compiled into their own assembly and you can send it to someone. A shared project basically means that C# file, native test, is compiled with the iOS and the Android and it becomes the same assembly. So being a shared project, you can actually still use your compiler directories if it's Android or if it's iOS. Whereas you can't actually have these type of compiler directories in a portable class library because it becomes its own assembly, whereas this is actually compiled with Android or iOS. So you can see here, if it's Android, we're creating our new fab button, setting the image, and then adding it to the Xamarin.Forms control hierarchy. So if I actually jump into that button there, you'll see that this floating action button, when you jump into it, is actually an Android native control. But then when you actually have a look at this stack layout, it's a Xamarin.Forms stack layout. So it's really cool to be able to have the Xamarin.Forms control toolkit and then just embed a native control into it as well. And then you notice if it's iOS, it's a UI segmented control. So you know something's iOS if it's got UI in front of it. So yep, we create a segmented control and then we add it to the control hierarchy. So this is done with a shared project, but you can also do this with a PCL. You just have to set up your hierarchy inside your native application and then grab it from the PCL. What I might actually do is show you the Evolve application. So this Evolve application, it's all open source, created by James Montemango from Xamarin Evangelist. So it's a really good example of an application that you can build. So you can see here you got your events. This, I'll show you the app links to set up, so you can actually play around with the app links. It's got push notifications, and the majority of the code is actually shared. There's only a little bit of native code in there. It actually integrates with your calendar as well. So if you're thinking about using Xamarin.Forms, then I recommend checking that out. So some bonus tips. So Xamarin Android, well Android in general has an issue with images because for some reason it wants to take any PNG image or any image you give it and it converts it to a bitmap, which like really balloons out your memory usage in your application. And Xamarin.Forms makes it even worse because it's an abstraction on top of Xamarin Android. So what you actually need to do is you need to take your image and make it as small as possible, so you need to resize it and only actually put into Android memory as much as you actually need to see. And FF Image Loader will do that for you. It'll manage your memory, your performance. It'll also actually cache your image for you. Xamarin plugins. So you've got Xamarin provide plugins that you can use. There's a bunch of them that you can use. And there is another thing that you can use Xamarin.Forms. It's called XLabs. But that thing has just ballooned out with lots of things that you don't really need. The Xamarin plugins, they're individual components that work in a portable class library. So there's one API, the connectivity API, for example. You can put that into your NuGet in your portable library. It works on iOS and Android automatically. and it's just a single API and you only program it once. So if you're doing MVVM in Xamarin.Forms, which is probably a good idea, most people tend to recommend it. There's a open source toolkit called Property Changed. It'll save you a lot of time in implementing properties. And user dialogues is a great one that we use pretty much in every Xamarin.Forms project, because Xamarin.Forms has a few user dialogues, but usually, well, most applications you're going to need to interact with the user, you're going to need to show some dialogues. So that's why user dialogues we recommend. Other things that, well, we use them all day, so I guess our opinion is biased, but every project we do it in Fresh. It's probably one of the first Xamarin.Forms MVVM frameworks, probably one of the best. Slide over Kit, you can make some really cool stuff with, but it's a little bit fiddly to get working. But if you have a look at it and you really want it, then have a look at it. You can do popovers and menus and slide in from the side and slide in from the top. And Fresh Essentials is also something that you can probably look at. So that's it. Actually, one more thing is I was so happy that I was able to get rid of these slides from my other presentations that I just wanted to burn them again. All gone. So I guess any questions? Got a bit of time.
More of a general question about Xamarin. How do you find the community and support from Xamarin if you're running into trouble?
So the Xamarin forums, people are always on there answering questions. I think it's probably better than Stack Overflow, but the community is great. There's lots of people doing open source stuff. It actually has foundations in the mono and open source. So the people that are actually really into Xamarin come from an open source background already. So I found it more open source than traditional .NET. But yeah, jump on the forums. Another question?
What are the mapping controls like?
There's a built-in.
Does mapping, Xamarin, so you got to pull up maps, work on layers.
Yeah, so it's the native APIs. Xamarin.Forms has a mapping component, but if you're doing serious mapping stuff, you'll probably grow out of that pretty quickly. The one that comes with Xamarin.Forms is really good if you just want to put a map in with one little spot. But if you're doing serious mapping, then it's the native APIs that you can use for iOS and Android. Depending on your application, if the whole application is a map, then maybe you want to use Xamarin.Forms because you're going to be using the native APIs for Android and iOS. Most of the mapping toolkits actually work on Xamarin as well. Like if you got a native toolkit, which is the mapping toolkit, they work on Xamarin as well. So there's the Google Maps. There's one by New Tech, but I can probably have a chat to you later if you have any questions. Yeah. So it depends on how serious you are. So, but if it's serious, then I'd probably recommend looking at just what actually is available in the native APIs.
I've got two questions. One is not related to just this version. I'm asking, is there any in-app purchase facility with Xamarin, or do we need to do it in native code?
So it's not in Xamarin.Forms. But because Xamarin, so anything that you can do in an Objective-C project or a Swift project with iOS, you can do in Xamarin iOS. And that's the same with Android. So anything you can do in Java, you can do in Android. As far as in-app purchases, you still have full access to the native API, so you still implement it, but you just do it via an abstraction. So you have so I think Xamarin are actually working on like a component for in-app purchases, which means that you won't have to do all the sort of legwork. But at the moment, if you want to do in-app purchases, you basically you can go to the Xamarin documentation, look at how they do it for Android, and then look at how they do it for iOS. And then you create like an interface, and then you can access the in-app purchases. Actually, one of these apps has in-app purchases. I can bring it up. So we did the in-app purchases on iOS. So I'm already subscribed, but what that'll do, if I'm not subscribed, it'll go access the App Store, it'll bring down the price, and it'll let me do the payment, and then it'll jump into the native payment gateway. So we just had an interface that we set up in iOS, and then we passed that interface back into the portable class library, which Xamarin.Forms uses. So it'll be like I in-app purchases, get me my price, and then it'll be I in-app purchases, make payment. So we only had to do that for iOS, and we didn't even enable it for Android because we didn't need it. More questions?
The other question is about gaming stuff, mixing it with Xamarin.Forms even I've seen, such as, I'm not sure how do you say it, URHO, which is...
Eurosharp?
Eurosharp.
Yeah.
Do you recommend that library for creating 2D games?
I mean, I haven't actually done a lot of that, but I know that Miguel, one of the founders or the CTO of Xamarin, he created that library. And, well, can't speak for it personally, but I definitely look at it because it's a cross-platform library. So, yeah, I think if you're going to do Xamarin, you can probably have a look at that. Another question?
Yeah, is it technically possible to write within the framework of Xamarin there, so an app for your iOS, your Android, but also desktop, Microsoft desktop, Apple desktop?
Yeah, well, for iOS and Android, that is what Xamarin is because they have the abstraction on the native UI kit. Whereas for Windows, they don't have to do anything because C# already works. And any like portable libraries that you create, any like application frameworks, if you can use them on a C#.NET server, and then you can also use them in your portable class library for your iOS and Android, and then also on your Windows phone. Xamarin.Forms works on UWP and Windows 8.1. So, and I think it's going to work on Xamarin Mac soon as well. So there's some people working on that. So you can do Xamarin.Forms. So we do Xamarin.Forms where it works on iOS, Android, and UWP. Sorry, you go? And potentially on a Mac, yeah. iOS and Android are like the first two platforms that are probably the most supported. UWP with the Microsoft purchase is going to get bigger. Cool, is there any other questions? We've got a bit of time, I think. Yeah.
This also obviously supports Windows Phone, but it seems like the platform is dying. Do you have any advice for that? Is that part aspect, is it just through UWP or is it?
Well, we actually are finding that, I don't know about Windows Phone, but UWP as a Windows platform is actually getting bigger because they're selling so many tablet devices and the actual desktop devices for Windows. So I guess what's your question? Is it what should we do with Windows Phone or?
Yeah, I mean, is that people using it to develop Windows Phone apps? Or is that
Xamarin? Yeah, there's some people still doing it. Like we have requests. There's enterprises that are still using Windows, and they've bought Surface tablets for the big operations department. So we're actually developing for Windows.
And if you were to use it, going back to that previous question for desktop, then how does it work with a mouse keyboard?
Yeah, so it just works the same with the mouse and keyboard. Obviously the gestures, well, because if you think about Windows UWP, it's got the gestures in there, but then there's also a mouse and keyboard component that you can use, and that's the same with like an iPad Pro. So generally, they're just inputs, outputs, so they do work. If it's a keyboard and mouse, then obviously if you're all gesture-based and they don't have gestures, then that's not going to work. So I guess you have to think about that. We find that we just have to test on all the devices that it's going to go on and just make sure that it works. Any more questions? How many people are, so nobody's using Xamarin, or has anyone actually started using Xamarin yet? Okay, and people thinking about using it, I guess that's why you're here. Did you look into Xamarin.Forms before? Or you, yeah?
Yeah, so we kind of looked at it a couple of years ago or 3 years ago with the Mono.
Yeah, Mono Touch.
A while ago, and the thing that turned us away at the time was paying a separate license per developer per platform.
Yes.
And very expensive. We went with the Kendo hybrid apps.
Yeah.
But now that it's kind of open source and we're a .NET shop and stuff, now.
Yeah, so the pricing was definitely a big blocker that stopped a lot of people from using it. But now when it's free, you can actually, if you've got an MSDN license, then you can actually get the enterprise version included. But there is actually a fully functional free version now. So a lot of people are actually going to start using it. And it's good when people use a platform because it actually, when something doesn't work, we're more people to complain. So it's good.
It kind of felt strange to ask for different money for multiple platforms when it's kind of the same feature of the item. So it's good that they're different.
Yeah. Yeah, they were a startup, so I guess they were trying to like make money so they can impress their investors. But now Microsoft just want to sell the cloud, so we get Xamarin included for free.
But Xamarin is Studio, which is running on Mac and other platforms, is not free. It needs subscription.
There's a free version of Xamarin Studio. It's the same. I think it's the Community Edition. So you can fully make Xamarin applications and put them into the store on the Community Edition.
Xamarin is not Visual Studio.
Both. So there's a Visual Studio Community Edition which you can do apps in, and then there's Xamarin Studio Community Edition that you can do apps in, and then there's like the Enterprise Edition. So there was other things. They had like a free version, a starter one, but it was too restrictive. You basically couldn't use it. So now you can use it if you just want to develop apps and you're like an independent software developer, or if you're MSDN, then it's already included, so you don't have to worry about anything else. And yeah, hopefully with the Microsoft purchase, they're going to ramp up the development, and I'm assuming that's going to happen, and they're going to deliver more features, which is good.
Do you have much experience with the Kendo stuff, like in terms of maturity of the performance now that it's in, like compared to other sort of hybrid or?
Yeah. So I was about 4.5 years ago that I started with a hybrid application, and I was using jQuery Mobile and Cordova. And I went to my boss and I showed him the app, and he's like, "This is shit." And then I went and tried to fix it, and I took it back to him. He's like, "This is still shit." And I think we did like 3 or 4 times. And then a colleague said, "Look at this, you can do like C#, and it's like all native." I'm like, "That's not going to work." And then like he actually came back to me. He's like, "What did I build?" And I'm like, "You suck." And then after that, I went to Xamarin, and then I never really looked back because it always works. I mean, apart from when it doesn't work, it's still like it. What you can actually deliver in the end is actually a good application, and that's why I stick to Xamarin. And even if you're using Xamarin.Forms, where it can fall over at points, you always have the option in Xamarin.Forms to do everything natively. So you can have a full native page if you want to. So there's no point in using Xamarin.Forms where you'll get stuck and you won't be able to get yourself out of trouble. Like we've done a mapping application before where pretty much we started off using the Xamarin.Forms maps thinking it was going to be good enough. And then we realized that the APIs weren't going to be enough. And we basically just took the whole Xamarin.Forms page and built it natively for iOS and Android so we could get ourselves out of trouble. There was no way that we got stuck somewhere. So that's why we use it primarily, just because there's always a way out.
So you're saying like pick and choose for the
You can, yeah. So you can have Xamarin.Forms for like 90% of your app, and then have a whole page which is like a native page with the native APIs and using native controls that you get from the GitHub. And then you could have 50-50. You can really just mix and match it how you want to. And the one thing is, one other thing that we've done a little bit is actually, because it's the native, you can use the native web view controls, which is essentially you can have little bits of web inside your Xamarin.Forms application. So you build an application that's got native APIs, it's got Xamarin.Forms APIs, and it's got HTML APIs, but you're just picking the best part for the job at hand, really.
What's the like the overall size to download to the apps? Native, actually true native, like an iOS developed native app versus Xamarin, using all the native controls in terms of like overall download size and performance.
Yeah, if you want to get a Xamarin like application size down, you can get it down. There's always going to be like a little bit more. Like if you do out of the box, I think like an iOS is going to give you like under 5 megs, whereas under Xamarin.Forms by default is like under 12 megs. But when you start putting images in your applications, it just balloons out. And that will happen on a native iOS project anyway. So if you want to keep your app size small, you'd have to do that natively anyway. You'd have to think about that. And you can actually do that in Xamarin as you go through. And if you read how to actually reduce your app size, you can do it. So there is a little bit of overhead, but not enough to make you worry about it really.
The preferred approach with the portable class library or the shared library really just application specific, whether you're going to have sort of separate code targeting like low-level features on Android or iOS, or is it only sort of if you're not really going to do anything that's two platforms, so you can...
Yeah, the shared projects, they actually take your code and then they compile it into the same project on the iOS and the Android. So you use compiler directives. So I guess if you're going to have like that native embedding example where you're going to have lots of native code and then lots of native iOS and native Android, then the shared project is really good. But we use portable class libraries because it makes us think in a more platform specific way. And because if we want to actually get some native features, we have to create a dependency and we have to do the interfaces and everything. So it actually forces us to make even that component reusable component, so then we can put it up to the app, to NuGet and reuse it again. So it makes you think in that sort of portable way. Whereas if you're doing the shared projects, it's so easy just to go and write native code, and then you don't think about it in more of a componentized way, really.
But going with shared projects, we can't really put it in app stores. Because it needs really built for the specific platform. So we can't deploy it there, can we?
So when it compiles down, it just compiles down to the native areas. Let's have a look. Oh, this is the native embedding. Yeah, so what actually happens here is you've got these compiler directives, and because I see here where it's bold the Android project, I've got my compiler directive in there, and that's Android code. When this actually compiles down, and I have a look at it, see, there's this native test droid, and that's just the one assembly that all that code compiles into. But if I opened up a PCL, that native test would be its own assembly, and you could use that in other components. But this is like the same as file linking. Sometimes we use it. So a good example of when to use these shared projects is the file API is not available in the portable class library, so the file access, checking if a file exists. But the API for .NET is the same. So you can still use the same API in a shared project, but it just compiles in the Android and in the iOS rather than compiling into its own portable class library that I can give to somebody and they can use. But we don't do a lot of shared projects unless there's a specific reason for it. We just, when we go and create a new project, in Xamarin.Forms. You have the option here to use the shared library. Primarily, we always use portable class library, but if there's a reason we need to use a shared library, then we'll jump in and do a shared library.
So for PCL, you just got to be careful up front, you know, all the
Yeah, I think the portable class, yeah. No, we would still keep the portable class library and then just add a shared project for the stuff that we need to have shared. But a lot of the time you don't even need a shared library because what you do is you just put it into your iOS and Android project, create an interface and then put it into your IRC container. And if on Android, if you put it into your IRC container, that's your Android implementation. On iOS, you put it into IRC container and that's your iOS implementation of that feature. And I think that's about time. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for coming. Who wants some Xamarin monkeys? Come and collect some.